Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chardonnay zombie Jared Hornbeck, and I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. But I wouldn't think about trying to brave this worldwide pandemic on my own. No, who else is with me here today?
Well, it is I, Steve Gunley, the guy who forgot to think of a clever thing because this movie sucked all the cleverness out of my brain. This is the podcast about moderate to severe death, Chardonnay zombies, and minestrone meltdowns. That's because this is the podcast about Corona Zombies, a oddly historic movie that only kind of qualifies as a movie. It's a very, very weird beast that I'm excited to talk about. A film that has an admirable spirit to it, if nothing else. But we'll get into my complicated thoughts on this movie. We do have a special guest joining us for this pandemic era blast here. Who's joining us today, Jared?
Well, you mentioned this movie is an odd beast, so we had to bring in an odd beast. And so, that's just how it goes. The person who is here is a comedian, video editor, lots of sketches you can find on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. He is the host of the comedy shows / horror movie screening series Hoff's Horror Fest. And he's written stuff for Comedy Central, Paramount Network, Funny or Die. Hoff's Horror Fest, super funny. Hoff Matthews, what's up, dude? How's it going?
Oh.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have some help to talk about this one. It's a very unusual film in a lot of ways. And look, this is the movie that Charles Band decided to open his autobiography with. And I think that's kind of telling because this is a movie in a lot of weird ways, for all of its many, many flaws. It's a movie that really encapsulates the kind of producer, the kind of filmmaker, the kind of person that Charles Band is. Global pandemic is not going to stop him even for 1 second from making movies. It's his way of working through the world. It's his way of processing things. And so there's something that's kind of admirable about the way that he approaches it.
I would put the words kind of like capital, bold, all caps, for sure. I will say, we'll throw our cards sort of on the table. I think it'll be kind of obvious before we get to any kind of like final thoughts or recommendations, how we really feel generally. But I will say that over the last few hours, I have softened a little bit on my stance on the movie. I was gonna say, you sent me a text yesterday that just read, "Corona Zombies broke me."
Yeah, I hope you guys don't hold it against me for suggesting this one. To be clear,
that ship sailed, buddy.
One way or another.
No, so it's funny because we cast our net out for guests and people pick movies, and sometimes, because we've been doing it for a little while now, and we've got a lot of episodes scheduled, either that haven't dropped or that are in the spreadsheet for the upcoming months. Some people have gotten their second or third choices because it was like, oh, what about this one? Oh, or it's scheduled already, whatever. This was your first choice, Hop, your only choice, I should say, that you asked for. And I think, given what you do for a living, it kind of makes sense. There's aspects of this movie that I admire, and we'll talk about them as we get into it. I think my initial reaction, I feel like I've gone through like 6 of the 7 stages of grief since having watched this movie, and I'm getting towards the acceptance part of it, or maybe that's somewhere earlier on. But tell us a little bit about like your background with horror movies and stuff, because you're a horror guy. I know you from Final Exam Trivia. And so, but you work in comedy, but there's sort of like the marriage of horror and comedy. Oftentimes, you see the two things together. So how did it like start for you? Did you discover one before the other? Like bring us back to, when you developed a taste for these things.
Sure. So I guess, first of all, growing up, my dad worked at a video store. So I got free rentals. So that's like a good, just entrance into the whole scene, I guess. And I mean, I was interested in horror and comedy, like both from when I was a kid. I mean, I would like rent all the Universal horror movies like every Saturday night or whatever. But I was also like, watching The Simpsons twice a day and like reading as much Mad Magazine as I could get my hands on. So it was always like those were just both the things I gravitated towards the most for whatever reason. And I was also, a big Mystery Science Theater 3000 fan, which I feel like that show is sort of controversial among cult movie fans now. Like some people kind of feel like it's, it doesn't maybe take into account a certain self-awareness that a lot of the films might have had or whatever.
Sure,
but
yeah,
I do still think it's a very good show in the sense of just kind of teaching you to react to media in a thoughtful way rather than just sort of absorbing it without any kind of, I don't know, critical thinking.
Yeah.
So I enjoy stuff that like remixes and recycles media in that sense. And as you mentioned at the top, I eventually had this show called Hoff's Horror Fest, which started back when I was doing stand-up in New York, where I would host a horror movie screening, usually like every month, and break it up with like, skits or like sort of late night style bits related to the film. And I did that for a few years at bars in Brooklyn generally, or Manhattan. And then when the pandemic hit, I converted it into a live stream show where I was doing like public domain movies on Twitch or on YouTube. And that was like part of how I kind of kept myself and hopefully my collaborators and the people watching sane while the pandemic was going on. So on that level, I do really kind of relate to what Charles Band was trying to do here. I find it very sort of endearing.
Yeah, exactly. There is kind of that spirit to it where you do feel like this is just the way that this guy processes bad news, hard news. The wheels are always turning in an interesting way.
Yeah. And I guess we should say this movie was released to streaming on, I believe it was April 10th, 2020.
That is correct. Yeah, 28 days after the lockdown was initiated, which is insane. Less than that, actually. Yeah, it was.
Oh, I was going to say, surely not by coincidence.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I got my like little, dinky live stream going, that was in May. Like, I mean, I had to learn how to use OBS and stuff, but I was also like, I need to take a moment to just wrap my head around everything that's going on right now because it's just so overwhelming. I need to like step away from all this comedy stuff for a bit. Charles Band clearly like just did not need that, or just that. Yeah, that's not how his brain works, as you said.
Yeah. And again, I just have to express some admiration for it. Let me go into some stats about this movie because the production of this movie is far more fascinating than anything we're actually going to talk about in the film. Corona Zombies, like you said, was released April 10th, 2020. It's directed by Charles Band, written by Kent Rudebush and Sylvia St. Croix, and it stars Cody Renee Cameron, Robin Sidney, and Russell Coker, and that's the entire cast, not including all of the uncredited voice actors and footage from older films that have been spliced in here. All right, so flashback, March 19th, 2020. We all remember where we were. The United States has just issued an unprecedented order to shut down all schools, businesses, public spaces. Everything is locked down because of COVID-19, the novel coronavirus, as we were calling it then. Most of us are freaking out, losing our minds. Am I going to lose my job? How long is this going to last? Am I going to die? Like, all of these questions are very forefront in our minds. But for Charles Band, that is not what he is thinking about. He is already writing a script, planning out his next movie, finding a way to capitalize on this. Now, I think he puts it really eloquently in his book. He says that an exploitation movie is not about exploiting people, as it's often kind of misunderstood to be. Like it's not about like nudity and gore. It's about exploiting a moment. It's about finding a zeitgeisty thing that people are talking about and then making the cheapest possible version of that. That was something that will play to that. And so he's already thinking about that. Now he starts planning this movie a few weeks before lockdown, because if you remember, Australia, China, those places were already locked down a few weeks before it ever came to us, and we had rumblings that this might happen, that, this disease might be a big problem. We had rumblings happening, but it wasn't going to be for sure yet. But he wasn't like spending any time worrying about that. He was worrying about how to get a story together that was going to take advantage of this moment as quickly as possible. So he says he sat down, he had a dinner with Billy Butler, his friend and collaborator who's come up on the show many times, and they kind of spitballed some ideas. And the one idea they kept settling on was the 1966 Woody Allen film called What's Up, Tiger Lily? All right, that's a movie where Woody Allen inserts himself into a Japanese movie called International Secret Police, which is just kind of like a straightforward Japanese action movie. And he cuts himself in, redubs all the voices, and makes it a comedy. Funny
makes
concept.
it about, if I'm not mistaken, about an egg salad recipe.
If I believe
is what
that's right.
The conceit of the MacGuffin of that movie is.
It's been a while since I've seen that one. I remember it being funny though. I remember having a good time with that. It probably has a lot of racial politics that have not aged very well, or redubbing that has not aged very well. But this was a pretty clever and a funny idea, and of course, it went on to inspire things like Mystery Science Theater, which we've mentioned, and Kung Pao: Enter the Fist, which is another movie I kept thinking about in relation to this one.
Also, when you talk about Mystery Science Theater, I mean, the offshoot then of Mystery Science Theater, Riff Tracks, which is really what this feels like a lot because there's no silhouettes on the screen.
Right. Well, and I'll have thoughts on that. I'll have to get into it. But so the one thing that Charles Band definitely has at his disposal is a lot of either underseen or unreleased movies that he's worked on. He probably has a ton of them. So he took sources from two different movies. One is called Zombies versus Strippers. And the other one is called Hell of the Living Dead. That's a 1980 movie from Bruno Mattei. It's an Italian film that either never got released here or got a very limited release here. I forget.
I don't know how many opportunities we're going to get on the show to talk about Bruno Mattei.
Yeah,
so
not many.
I think this is as good a time as any to say,
we need.
I'm not going to tell you to run, don't walk to watch Corona Zombies. But I am going to tell you to run, don't walk, to check out Cruel Jaws while it's still on streaming somewhere.
Oh, right. He's Cruel Jaws. Oh, I forgot he did Cruel Jaws. Yeah, Cruel Jaws is the funniest thing ever. I mean, yeah, it actually uses stolen footage from Jaws, as well as the stolen soundtrack from Star Wars. He thought he was going to get away with actually taking the most famous movie score of all time and putting it in his shitty shark movie.
It's a shocking moment when it happens. It's a jaw on the floor type moment. And he's also, he's responsible also for a bunch of those Italian sort of exploitation dystopian movies, and also he beat James Cameron to Terminator 2, at least in title.
Oh my God, yeah, that's right. Oh man,
with a movie which is as much a ripoff of Aliens as it is of Terminator. Also.
If not more,
there's like layers.
Yeah.
Isn't Greta in that movie?
Yeah, I think so.
I believe so. Yeah, he did Zombie 3, Robo War, Rat's Night of Terror, Women's Prison Massacre. I mean, this is some Z-grade fun trash. If you ever want to check out the Bruno Mattei film catalog, it's worth doing. But you can catch a little glimpse of it here with Hell of the Living Dead. Now, Zombies versus Strippers was shot in 2012. And it's on a digital camera compared to the film stock that they use for Hell of the Living Dead. So these movies do not match up. Also, one
so it looks immeasurably worse.
Yeah, one movie takes place entirely in a strip club. The other one is entirely in a jungle. And then, so he takes this footage, and then Band comes up with a wraparound story of a sort involving like a ditzy blonde girl named Barbie who is trying to find enough toilet paper to survive the pandemic. So this is kind of one of the things that makes this movie really interesting to me. Not the fact that Barbie is looking for toilet paper, but because this movie came out so early in the pandemic, it's a weird like living document of sorts. Like these are the jokes we were making. These are the things we were worried about. There are moments in this movie where they show footage of the news where Trump is saying like, "Oh, I expect it's only going to be like 3 more weeks," and you really get like a little tinge of like oh no, like they actually didn't know it wasn't going to last like only 3 more weeks. Like we didn't know it was 20. We're seeing these people reacting to this news like long before we knew what was going to happen. So it's kind of frozen in amber, this little moment of very early pandemic anxiety.
Yeah, and that time I remember that week or a couple of weeks stretch being so strange because we had a field trip. We were going to take my students to an NCAA thing at the Barclays Center,
Hmm.
actually. And the phys ed teacher in my school had gotten a bunch of like complimentary tickets. And so we made it a field trip, which I think was supposed to be on about March 9th or so
Oh
of
yeah.
2020. About a week beforehand, after we had already sent out all the permission slips because we got the tickets quickly, parents started to email the school and say, we're a little bit worried that this coronavirus thing is getting downplayed a little bit and that things are going
Yeah.
to get significantly worse. We canceled the field trip. The kids were like devastated. I remember and then we canceled the field trip on like the Monday. And then on the Friday of the same week, we were getting the announcement that we were going remote starting like the middle of the following week. And it was just a disaster. We were
Oh yeah.
packing things up for the kids, care packages of like books they needed to take home because it was advertised as the city's going to be shut down for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
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 And then, I went through another full calendar school year and a half of
Yeah.
fully remote into hybrid model before everyone was even back in the school building. And I think that's one of the things that made me sort of wince at this movie the first time through it was because, I'm not in any way trying to virtue signal or get uber political or anything. But I do think that given the way in which the pandemic was handled in the country in, let's say, the 6 to 9 months following the release of Corona Zombies, it really makes this like less of a funny footnote to look back on.
Mhm.
Like it really ages it poorly because you can see trying to get out in front of this, like, oh, this coronavirus is coming. This is going to be the next swine flu. And there was even a movie made about swine flu. And there's an air to this of like, we're going to look back on this 6 months from now and recognize what a ludicrous moment and overreaction this was that permeates this production. And to me, like, that just ages so poorly. Like,
well, I mean, I will, in defense of Charles Band, and this is like, obviously it's a film in incredibly poor taste, and that's, they have to sort of take that as part of the project. I do think that it is not like downplaying the virus. Like, I think there are jokes in it where the joke is like they show a clip of Trump being like, yeah, we're going to be open by Easter. And then they cut to the zombies versus strippers footage of people just like getting torn apart and everything.
Right.
And then you have like jokes, or not jokes, but like parts later on in the film where they're like saying like, yeah, everybody needs to like make sure to wash their hands or whatever, which he actually didn't. Wash their hands wasn't that important, but people thought it was. Like, it does seem like he was at least coming to it from a place of thinking it was a real issue. It doesn't feel like it's like an anti-masker movie or anything like that.
Oh, no, not at all.
It doesn't, but I do feel like there is a little bit of playing both sides. Like, I think there's a little bit of the way it approaches sort of the hygiene and, disease control aspects of it, where it's because they didn't know. So it's sort of, I feel like it kind of, there's occasionally a line or a little joke that sort of insinuates that the precautions are kind of ridiculous, I feel. But then at the same time, you get those moments, like you said, with the cut from Trump. And I have to say, I know this was a real thing going on in our country. Couldn't they just cast somebody as a bumbling president and shot 5 minutes of footage?
Yeah,
like there's something that places it too realistically for me. Like, have it just be someone. It could even be like the Mayor Ebert from Godzilla, where it's like clearly a Trump stand-in.
Right.
But it was just, that was the other thing, was like having it spliced with like real news footage, except for the footage of the Spring Breakers, because fuck those people.
Right. Well, see, I think including the footage of the Spring Breakers who are ignoring the lockdown or just making light of it, I think supports kind of Hoff's idea too, that like this is more. I don't think this movie is punching down at the virus or making light of the virus necessarily. I think it is responding to some of the over-the-top reactions people are having, but
Sure.
it's not saying that this isn't a real disease. It's not saying this isn't a real threat that's happening, like a lesser project would have.
Right. I guess that's what happens
yeah.
when you have no hindsight. Like you're writing something about an ongoing pandemic in that,
Yeah.
wasn't even, I mean, by the time, this thing had probably just moved from endemic to pandemic by the time this came out.
Well, okay, so the timeline here, and again, Ban goes on about this in a lot of detail in the first chapter of his book. March 19th, they announced the lockdown. March 20th, he wraps principal filming for this movie. Not starts, he wraps principal filming on this movie. Now, when you see how little original footage is in this film, it's a little more, it's a little less impressive. But it is just more of a thought of like, okay, he's already thinking about doing this. Like he's already kind of had cameras rolling and gotten it done. So this comes out on April 10th, pretty much immediately. And so this movie was kind of in the news for a little bit. People are like, holy shit, can you believe somebody already made a Corona movie? And yeah, most of the responses, like you said, was very like, oh shit, this is really bad taste. This is gross. This is like pretty exploitative, and all of this is true. No one's going to deny this is not a bad taste project, but it got Full Moon some notice. I think this is really the beginning of the era when Full Moon starts getting very reactionary. I've talked about it in the past, but like this is really the kicking off point. It's like they're trying to figure out how to make Full Moon relevant and fresh, like after the Puppet Master movies have kind of started doing their own thing. Like, Full Moon isn't really the brand that it was back in the 90s. So now we get to hear, it's like, okay, it's 2020. What are we? We do kind of like non-pornographic wood rocket movies is kind of what they do. That company that like does like the really creepy like pornos of like Pikachu or Bob's Burgers or something like that. That's clearly shot in an afternoon and is just reacting to something.
Or the ones that do like the This Ain't Blank XXX.
Sure,
movies,
yeah. Or this is like a Chuck Tingle approach to like, oh, okay, let's scan the headlines. Okay, I'll write something this afternoon and I'll publish it this evening, and then I'm, So that's kind of what Full Moon has become. They're going to react to what's ever in the news. They're going to make something quick and dirty and cheesy, and that's sort of what they've been doing. Although recently they've been putting a little bit more time and effort into it. Like they've had a Barbenheimer movie cooking that isn't going to come out probably until this coming summer, so it's not like immediately in the zeitgeist, but there is going to be a Barbenheimer movie.
I'm incredibly interested to see what the finished product of that Barbenheimer movie is, because
Ted's
it's a Ted Nicolau movie. So I'm like, there's going to be some level of artistry, at least to it, that maybe is absent in something like this. But you're right, Steve. This is very indicative of what the sort of 2020 and on Full Moon would become, because we're doing this as a standalone movie. This is technically the first in a trilogy.
That's the thing. Yeah, there are three Barbie and Kendra movies that all came out in the same year. There's this movie, there's Barbie and Kendra Save the Tiger King, and there's Barbie and Kendra Storm Area 51. Both very topical 2020 early pandemic viral things. I think I can barely remember what the whole thing about Area 51 was about. I think a bunch of nerds just wanted to Naruto run at it or something, like
storm it, I believe was the phrase they used.
That.
Okay. And then of course Tiger King. We were all watching Tiger King on Netflix because we had nothing better to do. So he's responding to that. And because he's working so shamelessly and like really not trying to kind of hide how bad these movies are, Charles Band gets his first Razzie nomination this year. These movies tend to usually be like below the radar of the Razzies. The Razzies go after like the bloated blockbusters or things like that. And occasionally, they get it extremely wrong, or they pick on people like Bruce Willis who are having severe degenerative problems and they don't realize it, and they look like an asshole. But so this most of the time they ignore Full Moon projects or Charles Band's projects. But he got a worst director and a worst screenplay nomination for this trilogy of films. And it did not win. I forget what won that year, but there are definitely probably worse like mainstream movies. I think where I come down on this is ultimately that this movie is pretty harmless, but it is violently stupid and just extremely unfunny. I didn't laugh a single time, even accidentally, because there's a reason that most movies take longer than a month to complete. It's because you need your script to go through a couple of drafts. You need to, I don't know, have a proofreader go over it to make sure that the news announcer isn't pronouncing a word differently than it's written on the screen. You know, like you maybe need to do things like that. You need to check your lighting and your editing, maybe spring for a slightly better green screen, you know, like there are things that you need to do and take a little time and planning with. So it's novel that he got this done.
First draft movie I've ever encountered,
so
I think, in my life.
To the point where, okay, we were talking about this is like a mixture of like What's Up, the Woody Allen movie. I'm already forgetting.
What's Up, Tiger Lily?
What's Up, Tiger Lily? I always confuse it with What's Up, Doc, and then I'm like, all right, wait, which one am I missing? But so What's Up, Tiger Lily or Kung Pao or MST3K is that they haven't really decided if this is like a riff track style movie where we're making fun of the film as it's going on, or if we're redubbing it Kung Pao style, as if like these are the characters, right? So like sometimes you'll hear dubs and they are performing a character that you're seeing on the screen. Other times it just feels like somebody off screen non-diegetically commenting on the movie, right?
I mean, I think to the extent that that's the case, it's just the former being done poorly. I think it's all supposed to be people in the movie, but so much of it, there's just so much dialogue in this where you don't see the person saying the dialogue because they presumably just didn't have the footage of a person talking in that moment, but they wanted a line, so it's just like B-roll underneath what's being said.
Right. Yeah. And these are just very first draft kind of jokes. Like a lot of times they just aren't even really jokes. Like we get a moment where like we cut to Barbie in her apartment and she's showering in her clothes. And I'm just like, but what's the joke there? Is the joke that she's stupid? Is the joke that this movie like that you're expecting nudity and you're not getting it? Like what? They never really go into it and they don't really play it off as it's a joke. I don't know. So I just didn't understand why that was thrown in there. Like she's just bathing fully clothed. You know, like just lots of little things like that. And then the lines that they're delivering, the ones that they're dubbing over, are just kind of like bumper stickers, you know, like they're the level of intelligence of like not even a shot glass at Spencer Gifts, like because those have a joke usually, you know. There's just kind of no joke. It's people just saying stuff.
Well, that's why, because they're not riffing the movie so much as they're redubbing it, and there needs to be exposition because they want you to, the whole conceit is that the footage you're watching is servicing the plot that this movie is introduced. And so half the time it's not even jokes. It's literally just them.
Let's go over here.
It's like so that they could have their so they can talk about the corona, not zombies. What's the part that's over Hell of the Living Dead? What are they? The Corona Squad or whatever?
The Corona Squad.
Yeah. So it's like they have to then introduce who the fake characters are in it, and they're not just riffing. And I have to say, like, Hoff, you can talk to this as being somebody who makes these kind of videos for your livelihood and for your profession and stuff. Riffing things is an art form, and it's not easy. And I think the reason that Mystery Science Theater and riff tracks and stuff like that have been so successful is one, because, you know, all of the people who have been writing for that show, and it goes beyond just Mike Nelson and Kevin Murphy and Bill Corbett. I mean, you have Mary Jo Pale and Bridget Nelson in there too, who were big contributors. And I think they would, you know, they would watch the movie a bunch of times and they would write jokes, and certain jokes wouldn't make it. And then they, you know, in rehearsing it, one wouldn't fit or sound right. So they would exit out and they'd bring something else in. And it was a bunch of a collective of perspectives of people adding jokes in as they riff these movies. Like this movie, this has got a Sylvia St. Croix credit. We know that's David Dakota.
Yeah.
Under a pseudonym. And I just feel like 2 or 3 people sat down and did this in one shot. without anybody really there to rein them in. And I think poor riffing is something that I cannot stand. And it's something that people sometimes, you enter into a contract with somebody if you're going to riff a movie. Like if you go to a bad movie night or something, it has to be understood by everyone that that this is the way you as a group are going to approach this movie.
Yeah.
The worst thing is if you go to see a movie in a screening, or it's understood that it's a B movie and maybe some of the people are there to kind of laugh at it. When someone takes it upon themselves to start like riffing a movie, it is one of my least favorite moments in life. Because rarely are they good at it. And it's just so, like, how did you feel as somebody who produces horror comedy content of this nature in some capacity, watching the job that they did here, that they deemed good enough to release this movie?
Right.
I mean, so the tricky thing about comedy is that sometimes the absolute stupidest idea you can come up with is the funniest thing you can do.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's the worst, most off-putting thing you can do. And it could be either one depending on who's listening or the context, I mean, this is clearly, like something that was dashed off as quickly as possible. There were it was probably just the first draft. They didn't rewrite it. They didn't have a big team working on it. I think it's as you said, incredibly stupid comedy.
Yeah.
I think some of the jokes hit. I mean, there's ones where, somebody's getting attacked by a zombie and he's like, this isn't the Jerry I know, or like they call the guy Argento because he does kind of look like Argento. Although the other guy who they refer to as looking like Matt Dillon does not look like Matt Dillon at all. So I don't know.
That's why he lost the lookalike contest.
I guess so. But then the other guy says he really did look like Matt Dillon and he didn't. There's even the part where there's the old woman zombie and there's a cat coming out of her belly and the soldier is trying to lift her dress and they dub over let's see those goat titties. For the tone of what this is, I thought that was funny.
That's fair.
There's also jokes which are incredibly stupid and also really racist, which I think kind of takes away some of the goodwill that I would otherwise give the overall project. So I'm willing to grant them a lot of latitude given how quickly they did this, and that was sort of part of the larger overall joke of the movie, that they got it out so quickly.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not something, it's not something that I would say to somebody watch this. It's really funny. Although the other thing I do want to note is that I only saw this for the first time relatively recently, but I did see some Letterboxd reviews of it when it first came out in 2020. That was how I had originally heard of it. And I looked up, a couple reviews of it from when it first came out. And I get the sense that people who watched it in April of 2020, when it first was released, had a relatively more positive view of it than I did, or than it maybe gets now. I do feel it sort of matched the psychology of that moment in a way that is hard to reproduce.
You're
at
absolutely
the very
right.
least, there was kind of a sense with a lot of critics. I remember reading a lot of movie reviews at the time because there weren't any new movies coming out. People were doing a lot of retrospectives, and so much of the tone of these reviews are this movie's really bad, but you know what? We're all about to die and we're all stuck in here and there's nothing to do and God's not real and who cares? It's just they're so checked out, So I think this movie probably eked a little bit of goodwill in that way, where people are this is dumb fun. And I agree with you that you will forgive a whole lot of really stupid shit if a couple of the jokes land. We keep mentioning Kung Pao. Kung Pao is one of the stupidest movies you could possibly conceive. And there are some jokes in there that absolutely fall flat. And then every once in a while, there'll be a line reading or a sight gag that will just make you fall over laughing because it's so stupid and so funny. And it just kind of hits exactly right. So you can forgive a lot of that. And I just never had one of those moments in this.
Yeah, this movie, like a lot of these movies, subscribes to, I think, what's referred to as the Ramones style songwriting, which is kind of we're going to throw a lot of songs at you. And if you don't like the one you're hearing right now, just wait a minute and a half and then a new one will start.
Exactly.
And that's kind of here. I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot of jokes. There's a lot of riffs. There's a lot.
Yeah.
And I will say occasionally there will be one where I would say I got maybe a a small. This is just to echo that it's very stupid, and I'm sometimes a very simple man. I did get a good giggle at the Tits and Giggles strip club name.
Sure.
Like, it's not high art, but okay. Like, it gave me a little giggle, which I liked.
I believe they changed that from the actual title in the movie, which is The Tough Titty.
Which they do also show on screen in this movie, which sort of also contradicts that joke a little bit. But
okay, and here's one of the biggest problems I have with this movie is just that, like, there's a very simple way to make all of this coherent, or at least like a little bit more fun, and that is to just go full MST3K. Barbie and Kendra are two girls who are stuck at home. They are bored. Let's put on a bad movie and joke over it, because that's a good way where you can have those Barbie and Kendra scenes kind of wrap around and hold everything together. This doesn't do that. All right, so the Barbie scenes, and I should mention it's only really Barbie scenes. We don't see Robin Sydney at all. She's only on the phone this entire time. But Cody Renee Cameron plays Barbie, and she's the only one we see for pretty much any time that we're doing any original footage. And she's just kind of like a sort of dumb blonde who's like trying to figure out how long this pandemic's going to last, and does she have any toilet paper hidden anywhere? That's so thin that, like, you don't need that, because while she's off doing that nonsense, the TV is on. And on the TV, apparently they're showing really detailed footage of a strip club massacre. And they have someone embedded with like a special jungle recon group that's looking to kill the zombies. Like,
in Baltimore and also China?
Somehow both. So like there was a very obvious path to make this a little more coherent, to give Barbie something to do, Kendra something to do. Like, there's a path to take, and they did not take it. And so what we get is just like three very disparate, silly movies that never once really come together.
No, and we also get, in the first 2 minutes probably of this movie, we get the joke or comment that every single person either said or heard in the month of March 2020. Yes. Which was, one, is this a holiday? Why is everyone drinking beer? Joke because of the coronavirus, but also the Wuhan, I love that rap group. God, every person either heard that joke or made that joke. Hopefully you're in the first category. But I was like, man, it's such a product of that moment, which, as I've sat with it for a little bit longer now, it makes me more forgiving of the choices made, because there are still plenty of wrong ones, and I think that you can't really look past. But I can look past the slipshod nature of churning this thing out so quickly and knowing kind of exactly what you're doing. There was no way for anybody involved in this to really know what the next year or so would bring. So it's not mean-spirited in that way. And I think it's hard to watch something like this separated from the fact that we all have lived this, to the point where we're having this conversation right now, and this thing's not even really fully gone.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, for all intents and purposes, sort of, but like, it's still very much kind of looming, to the point where we probably still down the road we'll talk about 2024 as still a during COVID time. I don't think we
like
could really start.
1989 is like when Tremors came out, but it looks like such a 90s movie, like it's that vibe. It's like people are going to look at it. We're still like late COVID, early World War III, or whatever era we're in between right now.
Which makes me really wonder what Charlie's cooking up right now.
Yeah, God. I'm worried he has like inside information from the Pentagon, and he's just like, we should be watching full moon movies just for alerts. It's like, oh, hey, wouldn't it be funny if I made a movie about, I don't know, a bunch of nukes coming out of the ocean? Crazy. Guys, rent this movie now.
Yeah, but I mean, that is really the value of this film, is as an artifact more than a movie. Like, even the fact that it is called Corona Zombies, like, I don't think anybody calls COVID Corona anymore, but that was like right? I mean, that was like an expression that everyone used then. It was like Corona or the Rona, and now it's just kind of been
I
replaced by
feel like I
COVID.
heard coronavirus more than I heard COVID-19 for the first few months of it being a thing.
Right.
Yeah. Just calling it Corona zombies kind of dates it immediately,
Yeah.
And, for the most part, like the connection between the coronavirus and the zombies are pretty unexplored. But we do get one shot of a zombie with a mask, which is kind of the money shot you need if you're going to do this project. They have an actor named Russell Coker, who is one of the only 3 living people or like current live people in the movie. And he's put on some real quick and dirty zombie makeup, and then they shot some green screen stuff that looks truly atrocious to wrap the movie up. Just real like Twitch was a thing in 2020. Like people were already like, most people have a green screen in their home that is capable of doing better effects than what they were able to manage with this one. So it's pretty hilarious in that regard.
Yeah, there is. I was looking at like articles about the film. There is like a production still of Charles Band, Cody Renee Cameron, and I guess Russell Coker, the guy playing the zombie, all together. So I don't know if they were like in a pod or what the deal was. As you see some reporting saying like everyone was isolated, but apparently like not entirely. So I don't know. I wonder if like Cody Renee Cameron, like her roommate was, had a camera or I don't know how that all worked.
I was wondering too. Yeah, maybe that's like her boyfriend or something. And like, he just kind of came in and did, 2 shots or something. I don't really know. Shockingly, there's not a whole lot of detail beyond what Band writes about in his book about the making of this movie. I was looking for some memorable quotes on the IMDb page, and that section is empty. I guess you could point to like Wuhan. I love that rap group. That's the one kind of memorable line that sticks in my head. I still didn't really laugh at it, but yeah. And so the whole central conceit of this too is we're still playing up the bat soup myth from the very early days of pandemic, right? Where we're like, oh, somebody in China ate a soup made from a bat, and that's what spread out. So now it's the Scambles Soup Factory, or as
what? I'm going to stop you for a second, Steve. Scramble soup. You know what? Not my least favorite. Not my least favorite joke in the.
That is you're damning it with the faintest possible praise. That this joke is not my least favorite. I mean, that's a competitive category for this movie, but all right. I do have a theory I want to put forward.
Sure.
Tell me if I'm crazy. Tell me if you guys heard this or not. The news anchor sounded suspiciously like Jeffrey Combs through an iPhone. Am I crazy? Am I crazy that he sounds like a little bit like Jeffrey Combs?
I didn't pick up on that. I'll have to listen again.
You know what? You're really going to make me go back and rewatch this?
Just for the few seconds, like I feel like there's something about the audio quality that makes me feel like, okay, this wasn't recorded in a studio. None of the people who've done any of the dubbing on this are credited. I think Charles Band is one of them.
I was going to say, I do think it's a shame they're not credited because, I don't know if you guys would agree, but I think they did a good job. Like, whatever you think of, like, the writing on the jokes, I think the voice actors in the dubbing deliver it pretty well. Like, they keep it pretty, like, earnest. They're not, like, I don't know, selling it out too much. I do sort of think that if Charles Band had gotten Jeffrey Combs to do a voice on this, like, Jeffrey Combs' name would have been on the poster, Like, that seems like how he would operate.
Yeah, that does make sense. He's not above, like, I can understand like putting in an Easter egg, but yeah, he's too much of a showman to not draw attention to the fact that Jeffrey Combs is somehow in his movie.
Yeah.
But it just made me wonder. I'm like, is he calling in a favor? I don't know, because we don't know who these voices are, and everybody would have been pretty bored around this time. Everybody would have been probably willing to pitch in and do something for $100 or something,
Oh man, I'm gonna have to go back and look now because I didn't know. And Jeffrey Combs, is someone whose voice I typically pick up on. The first time he's been featured on a couple of different roles, but the first time he was on Lower Decks, as soon as he started talking, I was like, oh my God, it's Jeffrey Combs. I know it's Jeffrey Combs. And because he just has a very, not only a recognizable voice, but also a very Jeffrey Combs identifiable line delivery.
Oh yeah, definitely.
One of my very favorites. So I will have to go back and rewatch the first 5 minutes or so of this movie and see how I feel about that, and then we can have that kind of go into the lore of our show a little bit.
There we
Maybe,
go. I would
yeah,
love to
you
be
want to
the ones
interact
that
with us a
cracked it.
little bit,
Like,
yeah,
yeah, I would love
interact
to
with
say
it a
we
little
cracked
bit.
that mystery, but we'll figure that out.
Yeah, I think with this, it's really like you're right, Hoff. I think the voices themselves are clear, and I think the articulation and the cadence of the voices, like you said, they do play earnestly enough. It never really sounds like the voices are too snarky with the images that they're talking over. So that aspect of it, I do like. There was something that I wanted to bring up briefly about the movie, and now I'm just trying to remember what it is, because we moved on a little bit from it, and
Oh,
I was
sorry.
just trying. No, it's fine. I was just trying to figure out what it was. There was sort of something in the final thought nature of the. This is what I wanted to say. Speaking of Jeffrey Combs, actually,
Oh, yeah.
sort of in a kind of a weird way. I do appreciate the slight detail of having the place be identified as Bodega Bay. Just to tie
gotta
it,
have that.
like a
Just for some-
Miskatonic U type, tying it to where this is. But then you immediately are taken out of the fact that this title card shows up, Bodega Bay Trailer Park, and it cuts to the inside of like a duplex house.
Right.
It's
Okay. I
like,
was
why
reading the
not
plot
just-
description, and yeah, the plot description is like, oh, this is about a woman living in a trailer park, and I'm just like, wait, no, it's not. Like, this is not a trailer. This is clearly an apartment. Like it's yeah. There's stairs going up to it. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it cuts to a room where I'm like, I live in an apartment in New York City, and that living room is probably bigger than my living room. This is
Yeah.
definitely not a trailer. Like,
No.
so just I think it's just kind of slapdash and thrown together so quickly and so haphazardly in a lot of ways that I think you can choose two ways to kind of take this in and walk away from a viewing of this. I think you can approach it the way I kind of did the first time, which was that I sat down, and as soon as it started, and I was like, okay, I know the conceit of this movie. I know it's mostly Hell of the Living Dead and zombies versus strippers. I know that. Let me see how I didn't really know that it was Rift. Like, I didn't really know to what extent that was going to be happening during the movie. But when they cut to the first the first archival footage of Hell of the Living Dead, and they made the bat soup reference, I just winced and I went, this is not what I want.
Right.
And then I really wasn't on board, because it takes a lot to get me to rather be watching a Bruno Mattei movie.
Right.
And it was just like, oh, the Hell of the Living Dead stuff looks pretty good, is what I kept thinking watching this, which is not really what you want to take away from it. But I think this is one of those cases where it needs to be looked at completely as a cultural footnote. Like, it needs to. This is a decision some people made to exploit this moment in history. This is the finished product. This is what they did. They got it out really fast. Admirable in some extent, and sort of nefarious in others, I guess.
Right.
I that's kind of how I've moved into it now. I'm like, I'm not offended by the movie. My first time through it, I just went, God, I was just like, God, these jokes are so stupid. And I really wish there wasn't real news footage kind of showing like, oh, this pandemic's going to clear up in a couple of weeks. Although I do understand the way that footage is used.
Oh, yeah.
It was just too soon of a reminder
Yeah.
of what a botched job that handling of the pandemic really was. But I think you almost can't assess this as a movie, because it doesn't even aspire to be a movie. It aspires
it's not even
to
feature
be
length. Yeah,
a
we haven't even
relic
mentioned that.
of this time. Yeah.
Yeah, this movie's only 61 minutes long, and it went straight to the Full Moon streaming platform. So even for a Full Moon movie, this is short, and it doesn't really have a cohesive through line. So it's really kind of more. It's almost like if a long TikTok reel of a movie. You know, it's a lot of kind of loosely connected, mostly unconnected incidents, and sometimes just full length footage of movies.
Or
Yeah,
I mean,
we're
you
getting
can look
into
at it.
Piranha Women territory here.
We are, yeah.
I mean, you can look at it as like almost a sort of horror host style thing, like a kind
Yeah.
of an episode of Elvira's movie Macabre, where you're getting little bits of what they shot, but it's mostly this recontextualized older thing. I mean, Jared, I mean, it's funny that you sort of say it still feels too soon to kind of go back to this, because that's part of what's interesting to this about this to me, is that I do feel like there is among a lot of people just sort of don't want to think about the pandemic anymore, and maybe never will again, and which is completely understandable, because it was this thing that just overwhelmed our entire lives and minds
Totally.
for like years on end, and was really traumatic and horrible. So I don't know if we're going to end up seeing like the studio productions like set during the pandemic, or looking back at it, or if everyone's just going to want to kind of move on. Because I mean, growing up, I don't recall ever really hearing that much about the 1919 or whenever it was Spanish flu pandemic, which got brought back up so much when COVID-19 happened, that there are all these parallels to this thing that happened 100 years ago, but
Right.
It doesn't seem like it really left that much of a cultural trace in a certain sense. But to the extent that people do want to go back and sort of have an understanding of this era, I think stuff like this, or like, movies that were made really when the lockdowns were happening in earnest, stuff like this, or Michael Bilandic's Project Space 13, or like episodes of TV shows where they were just doing everything through Zoom, are going to be what really give people a sense of like how much of a break from reality this time was.
It's one of those weird things, like the NBC sitcom Superstore kind of graduated
just
from
gonna
like
say this.
It's like you graduate from like, hey, this is like a pretty decent like Office sort of knockoff, and then it becomes like, oh, this is the most relevant show on TV right now, because we're seeing working class people like and what they have to deal with like getting through this era. So yeah, it is interesting that it gets to be kind of this cultural document in that weird way.
Yeah, and people have played with the format before. I mean, maybe not as quickly as Charles Band and Full Moon did with this one, but there have been people. I don't know if you've ever seen the Rob McElhenney show Mythic Quest.
Yeah,
which did an incredible pandemic episode where the entire episode is played over like a Zoom call.
Yeah,
and it's really, really incredible. And it was a way to get you sort of, I guess maybe to exercise some demons and to recognize that as surreal as this moment felt, it was a real thing that was this kind of collective traumatic experience that everyone felt together. And so people like, I mean, and this is not anything that's really that's that new either. I mean, there's always been, like, if you go back 30 something years, there have been movies that dealt very like straightforward about things like the AIDS crisis. Like there's that movie City in Panic from the 80s, which I believe is like a French Canadian movie. But then you have also things that were commentary on something like the AIDS epidemic, like James Bond III's Death by Temptation.
Sure,
which is a super fun movie with a lot of those themes kind of stirring in the background. And I think I always gravitate more towards when things are thematically linked with the post-traumatic events of something than when it's sort of, I guess, highlighted what the collective experience was really like. And so that's why I kind of was like, I remember this period of time. I remember wiping my groceries down with Clorox wipes and
being
trying
afraid to bring in
remain.
Amazon boxes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a bizarre, surreal time that I don't really want to go back to, if I'm being fully honest to there. Like it's
Hot
I'm
take.
very
Yeah. But,
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm probably alone in my thinking.
But yeah, I mean, genre can have this distancing effect, which I mean, Corona Zombies doesn't really take advantage of. But I mean, I think one of the best movies about 9/11 in a sense is Cloverfield, because like unlike a lot of movies that were like literally trying to depict what happened on 9/11, it doesn't feel this obligation to kind of graft on some sort of like redemptive note or make it somehow like inspiring or something.
Are you
It can just be
referencing the
about-
end of the movie Remember Me?
well, not specifically, but that could be an example of that, sure. But like a movie like Cloverfield can just purely be, wow, this would be really fucked up and scary if this happened, and that's it. And that is like the essence of what actually happened. Like that's really what it was, you know.
Yeah, I bring up I think the movie was called Remember Me, if I'm not mistaken. It just has that weird tacked on scene at the end where I think it's Zac Efron's character, or Pattinson, not Efron. Yeah, Robert Pattinson is just standing in the World Trade Center on September 11th. It seemed like just a kind of a shameless emotional tug to throw into the movie for seemingly no real reason.
That weird revelation where he's just the pilot is crazy. Like I had no idea that he was just the pilot of Flight 93. It was insane. Yeah. Park movie. Horrible note to go out on in our cheery episode about the global pandemic, but I think, you know what, if we include our plugs here, I think we are definitely going to be longer than the movie we just watched, which is a rare thing that we get to do, but always feels like a milestone on a fairly short podcast like ours.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much, Hoff, for being here and for bringing this movie for us and lending your insights. Where can people find your stuff?
I'm on most of the social media platforms: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Blue Sky, all that. And I post like little video sketches and stuff out there. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Is there a single sort of like sketch or something that's out there on one of your social media platforms that you feel like someone should check out as like a gateway or a first thing to get a sense of like what your comedy is all about?
My most popular video is it's me at a Trump press conference telling him that I like found some cookies in the kitchen and asking if I can have some, and then he yells at me for taking too many. So if you can find that one, people seem to like that one.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Love it. I think if you do find it, you will like it. And if you like what we do, then jump onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify and drop us a nice 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined. You can also follow us on all social media platforms. We are on Instagram at puppetmasters_Castle Freaks. You can also follow me personally at _Giallo_Jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We're on X, we're on Blue Sky, we're on Threads, we're on YouTube. You can find all of our stuff there too if you just search the name of this podcast. But this is not the only podcast that Steve likes to plug at the end of these shows. So Steve, what else have you got going on?
Yes, I have another show called Cinema Arcade. That's cinema and arcade mashed together. We watch movies and then play the video games based off of those movies. I don't really know what we have coming up when we listen to this episode. Our schedule's just kind of all over the place. I know we were talking about doing a bonus episode about the new Fallout TV show, which has been a blast to catch up on. We're all big fans of that. So we might break format a little bit and talk about some Fallout, but otherwise we just got lots of fun stuff coming up. We've got about 50 episodes out there that you can find. So definitely check that out wherever you find your podcasts. And also,
speaking of fun stuff, we've got something coming up next week that I think listeners are going to be super excited for. They were excited when we did the show in kind of the format that we did for the 2 previous entries. And so moving into this one here, I think people are going to be pretty excited. Steve, what are we covering next week?
Well, we are returning to the saga from whence we are born ourselves anon. Yes, that's right. I talk fancy now. We're watching Puppet Master 4 and Puppet Master 5. Yeah, that's right. The puppets are back for a little mini duology, the last of the numbered sequels, I believe. And movies I have not seen. Well, actually, no, I have watched Puppet Master 4 as of today, but I have not watched Puppet Master 5 yet. And looking forward to continuing the saga. And despite the last one being called the final chapter, rest assured there are still probably 130 more Puppet Masters that we have to do after this. So
yeah,
it's the last chapter the way Friday the 13th was the last chapter.
I was going to say, it's the Friday the 13th school of sequel naming.
Exactly.
Where they went for that one. And since we're hitting up another double Puppet Master episode, we've got to bring in the all-time authority. So Nat Bremer will be back on the show next week to talk Puppet Master 4 and 5, the man who wrote the Puppet Master Complete Guide, who had the conversation about 2 and 3 with us, and by proxy about 1, because he talked about the first movie a bit too. But he'll be joining us again because we like to go directly to the source on these kinds of things. So
we could say he is the Puppet Master. Yeah, we could say that. I'm willing to call him that.
We'll start.
I mean, we might have to speak with Toulon first, but yeah, I'm willing to let him have it.
All right, listeners. So join us next week for Puppet Master 4 and 5. Hoff, thank you so much again. Don't forget to check out all of his amazing comedy with a little horror twinged in, and we will see you guys next time.